Today at the National Press Club, the ambassador of the State of Israel to Australia, Amir Maimon. Appointed to the role last year, his address comes as the world's attention turns to the escalating conflict in the region. Amir Maimon with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club's and today's Westpac address. We're coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. My name is Tom Connell. I'm an anchor at Sky News and also treasurer here at the Press Club. Our guest today is His Excellency Mr Amir Maimon, the Ambassador of the State of Israel to Australia. We thank him for accepting our invitation, obviously at a difficult time. His Excellency is the recently appointed Ambassador of the State of Israel to Australia following an extensive career in the Israel Defence Force and the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well. Mr Maimon has held diplomatic posts in London, Canada, Turkey, Ethiopia and Washington. And he served at the Israeli Embassy in Ankara, Turkey in a wide range of capacities such as Charge d'Affaires and the Deputy Chief of Mission. Mr Maimon has served as the first Ambassador of the State of Israel to Lithuania, along with other notable appointments within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Israeli National Defence College as well. We at the National Press Club condemn the appalling attacks 2 weeks ago carried out by Hamas terrorists against Israel. We extend our deepest condolences for the Israeli lives lost in these attacks and the inexcusable taking of innocent hostages, noting there are still 222 being held in Gaza at the moment. This address comes as Israel is in the midst of its response, exerting its right to defend itself, on which it is backed by many nations around the world. Many of Israel's supporters are also urging it to show restraint and minimise civilian casualties after the bombing campaign, which has happened already. There is also the broader concern of conflict escalating in the region. You can follow the conversation at Press Club Ost or hashtag NPC. Please welcome His Excellency Amir Maimon.
Thank you, Tom, for the introduction. Before I begin, allow me to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet, the Ngunnawal people, as well as their elders, past and present. 3 weeks ago, my wife and I were in Israel celebrating the high holidays with our children and grandchildren. On Thursday, October 5th, I drove down from Tel Aviv to Kibbutz Be'eri, where a memorial to the Anzac is located nearby. It is less than a kilometer from this memorial to the Gaza border and close to where one of my relatives was killed in 1949, not long after Israel's independence. This last visit to Be'eri will be imprinted in my memory forever. It was the last memory of my country as it was. Driving back home on Thursday afternoon along the boundary with Gaza, I passed the small kibbutzim on the way that are typical of southern Israel. Places that, under normal circumstances, most people in the world would never heard about. As I drove past these places, I could not know that in little more than a day's time, Israel would be at war. I could not know that two of my relatives would be among the victims on the next Shabbat morning. I could not know, nor could I ever imagine, the horrors that were in store for these places, which would change our people and our country forever. Our lives are currently divided into two time periods, the time preceding the 7th October and the time following that day. Israel is brimming with shock, pain and horror in the wake of the outrageous massacre perpetrated by Hamas on innocent civilians on the Shabbat morning, which was also a religious holiday. As I stand here, it is difficult for me to recount the shocking details of this terrorist onslaught, but we cannot look away. We must face the absolute evil to understand why Israel is determined to defeat this murder machine. Beginning at 6:30 on Saturday morning, over 1,500 terrorists broke into homes and gunned down whole families while they slept. They fired rocket-propelled grenades into bedrooms. Mothers hid their children in closets, desperately trying to keep their babies from crying. But Hamas spared neither women nor children. Using steel wire, they bound mother to daughter, grandmother to grandson, and burned them alive. Do not look away from this evil. You must know what happened. They decapitated babies with knife. They rape young girls. They cut open a pregnant woman's belly. They set fire to buildings, burning them to the ground while people were hiding inside. They attack young men and women celebrating at a music festival in a forest clearing. They hunted the fleeing revelers, shooting and killing them with inhuman cruelty. A few hundred young men and women were executed right there in the forest. Using unspeakable violence, they abducted entire families, including 6-month-old babies and terrified children whose parents had just been murdered in front of them. Some 1,400 Israelis were murdered in a brutal act of mass slaughter, minute by minute, over many hours. Were the murderers ashamed of their actions? Absolutely not. They enthusiastically documented the atrocities and broadcast them live. And during the mass slaughter, 222 people were violently taken from their homes to Hamas dens of darkness as hostages, including the elderly, people in their 80s, and small suckling babies seeking their mothers. There are those who describe these actions as animal behavior. This is incorrect. Animals do not behave in this manner. People who cold-bloodedly tortured entire families to death are not animals. They are depraved monsters. The horrific acts of October 7th awakened feelings of helplessness and fear in the collective memory of Jews, emotions that evoke the trauma of the Holocaust. In the consciousness of the Jewish people, the names of places such as Be'eri, Kfar Aza, and Re'im will be forever tainted with the same horrors as Treblinka, Sobibor, Auschwitz-Birkenau. The State of Israel was established to serve as home for the Jewish people, to ensure that Jews are never led to their death simply because they are Jews. Hence, the terrible shock now prevailing in Israel. Nobody smiles. There is only profound misery, sadness, and trauma. But there is also a strong feeling of togetherness and a deep inner conviction that we must fight against this organization of terror and defeat it, to eradicate the threat of annihilation hanging over our children. We did not start this war, nor did we seek it, but it is a war that we are determined to win. We are fighting for our home, for our right to live. The Hamas Charter blamed the Jews for all the ills throughout history, dehumanizes Jews, and rejects any political solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. In many of its clauses, such as Clause 13, it states that there is no solution to the Palestinian problem except through jihad, meaning a holy war. But the Hamas Charter also explicitly speaks of a new genocide for the Jewish people. Clause 7 calls for the murder of Jews in every corner of the world, quoting as follows, "The stone and trees will say, O Muslims, O servant of Allah, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill me." And that's exactly what happened. They came to kill. For many years, parts of the international community have demanded from Israel not to pay heed to what Hamas writes and what Hamas says, not to take their words and calls to action literally, to ignore its ideology and terrible rhetoric. Israel was told that, despite the threats, Hamas wishes to improve the living conditions of the 2 million Palestinians who live under its bleak dictatorship, to guarantee them a livelihood, to provide them with assistance, and allow them the means to build infrastructure. The well-planned attack on Israel on October 7th permanently discredited this position of naivety and tolerance towards Hamas. Hamas is not interested in coexistence or peace. It is not interested in a better life for the 2 million Gazans, but in the elimination of the Jewish state and the murder of its citizens. This is not only its jihadist ideological goal, but also its only course of action. Hamas is ISIS, a Palestinian ISIS that unfortunately enjoys warm public relations and even the compassion of many in the West, including many in the media. Is there a more legitimate act of self-defense than when Israel attacks the Hamas terror organization to defend itself? Israel is not attacking the Palestinian people. In fact, Israel poses no threat to the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah as long as it does not join the attack on Israel. The same goes for any other actor in our region. Hamas is not interested in establishing a Palestinian state along Israel, but solely in the destruction of the state of Israel. In fact, the establishment of a Palestinian state is directly opposed to the Hamas conception of its ultimate goal, the establishment of an Islamic state in the entire territory, including the sovereign territory of Israel, from the river to the sea, as the slogans say. It is not interested in creation, but in total destruction, not in peace, but in eternal war, until extreme Islamism assumes power. The only solution, according to Hamas, is the destruction of Israel and the annihilation of its inhabitants. Hamas does not hesitate to sacrifice Palestinians in its attempts to achieve these monstrous goals. There is no freedom in Gaza, no freedom of speech, and no freedom of religion. But the situation is far more desperate. Hamas establishes its military bases within civilian population concentrations in Gaza, fully aware that photographs of dead Palestinian civilians are its most powerful weapon. Hamas conceals missiles beneath hospitals and United Nations schools and fires at Israel from these sites in anticipation of live broadcasts on television networks. Indeed, as we saw during the Al-Hali hospital blast, many reporters were quick to broadcast Hamas claims and propaganda without any verification whatsoever. This applies not only to the chief offender in this regard, the Qatar-based Al Jazeera, but also many reporters from Western media outlets. In that instance, a terrorist rocket that intended to kill Israelis malfunctioned and landed in the parking area of the hospital. There, it exploded in an open, unsheltered area, inflicting catastrophic damage and killing Palestinian civilians. Of course, This is exactly the kind of coverage that Hamas wishes to promote when it uses the civilian population as collective human shield. The only actors that should be blamed for the deaths of innocent civilians in the Gaza Strip are Hamas and the other extreme organization in Gaza, who hide among women and children, their own people. While the Israeli army uses its weapon systems to defend Israeli civilians, Hamas uses the civilian population of Gaza to defend its weapon systems. Israel is defending itself and fighting for its life. As a true democracy, it is doing everything in its power to avoid harming the innocent. It exercises its military power in a targeted, careful, and controlled manner, acting within the constraints of international law. Hamas, on the other side, proudly documents its acts of genocide and crimes against humanity. Israel compliance with international law extends beyond military operations and also includes the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The condition in Gaza, where healthcare, electricity, and water infrastructure has been neglected and damaged, is the responsibility of Hamas, not Israel. Hamas has been in sole control of Gaza since 2007, not Israel. When Hamas digs up water pipes to produce rockets, this is not Israel's responsibility. When Hamas rockets fall short of Israeli territory and damage power station, this is not Israel's responsibility. When humanitarian assistance provided by well-meaning governments across the world are exploited to plan, prepared for and execute terrorist attack, this is not Israel's responsibility. Do not be mistaken. The war against Hamas is not Israel's private war. This is a campaign not only about the future of the entire Middle East, but about the future of the world in which we live. If it will have implications for all of us. On one side of the world, a valuable and important alliance is forming between like-minded countries such as the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, many European countries, and of course, Israel. On the other side, an even coalition of rogue states and terrorist groups, of which Hamas and Hezbollah are the most prominent, are attempting to reshape the world according to their dangerous agenda. In this regard, it is important to understand the role of Iran in supporting violence and terror against Israel and its people. Since 1979, Tehran has actively worked to roll back liberal, democratic, and moderate Islamic values in the Middle East in order to promote its radical Islamic revolution. It has sought to undermine relations between states in the region, including the normalization of relations between Arab states and Israel. It has fanned the flames of religious and sectarian conflict in order to gain footholds and expand its influence. In the process, Iran has become the patron of terrorist proxy groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which it funds, trains, and equips with the goal of killing Jews and Israelis. Only days after the attack on Israel, Iran's foreign minister met with leaders from Hamas and Hezbollah in Beirut and foreshadowed military actions against Israel. The international community should and must begin to hold Iran to account, not only for the repression it inflicts on its own people, but also for the way it undermines peace in the region. When President Biden visited Israel last week, he reassured us, "You are not alone. We stand by you." Israel was filled with pride when we saw and heard the President of the United States express his full support for Israel's right to exist in security and its duty to eradicate Hamas. Prime Minister Albanese, too, has been crystal clear that Australia stands with Israel and recognizes its inherent right to defend itself. Other world leaders expressed their solidarity as well, including the leaders of Great Britain, Germany, France, Italy, and more. In Israel's darkest hour, Australia immediately grasped the horrific significance of what occurred on October 7th, the momentous impact that tragedy has caused for Jews, for Israelis, and yes, for innocent Palestinians as well. While still in Israel, I received phone calls from Prime Minister Albanese, Foreign Minister Wong, and many other political leaders from both sides of the aisle. On October 16, a landmark motion was carried in the House of Representatives. It unequivocally condemned Hamas and affirmed support for Israel and our right to self-defense. Bipartisan political support for Israel is firm, and the bipartisan political solidarity with Israel in its darkest moment is beyond doubt. This bond is not new. It dates back to the days of Minister of External Affairs, Doc Evett, and the very founding of the modern state of Israel. And now, in Israel's time of need, the certainty of this bond is clearer than ever. I also take this opportunity to thank all Australians who hold Israel close to their heart in these terrible times. Thank you for your prayers, your messages of support, for turning out at vigils and rallies in support of Israel. From Turak to Townsville, the outpouring of spontaneous condolences and solidarity has been overwhelming. Our reality is now divided into a time before October 7th and the circumstances that now confront us. This reality obliges all of us to take action. To defend Hamas is to defend ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Anyone who follows this course of action will eventually bring these murderers into their house. Every one of us will have to decide where we stand on this moral crossroads. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll get you to stay at the podium while we take some questions from the press, and I'll begin on that front. You mentioned Hamas and a ploy that's been shown to have been used by them plenty of times around civilians, being around targets, so being used, as you say, as a human shield. In that scenario, you still have the IDF pulling the trigger, as it were, firing that bomb. Where do you see the responsibility for the IDF and the Israeli government for what ends up in terms of those civilian casualties?
I would like to emphasize 2 points. The first one is that in accordance to the international law, once public buildings, and it can be libraries, mosques, schools, or any other public buildings, are used as a military post, so in accordance to the international law, these buildings are immediately identified and recognized as legitimate military targets. The second point that I would like to mention is that the Israeli Defense Forces ask all civilians to temporarily evacuate the northern Gaza area, and the emphasis is on the temporary, as we do not have any intention to harm innocent Palestinian civilians. The third point that I would like to mention, and I cannot elaborate, the Israeli Defense Forces is using an advanced munition, a very precise munition, and this is in order, once again, to avoid harming innocent civilians. Last but not least, let's not forget that the information about the Palestinian casualties arrives from the Palestinian Ministry of Health, which is controlled by the Hamas. Let me just refresh your memory. After the incident in the hospital, they immediately announced that about 500 Palestinians were killed as a result of the malfunctioning of the Hamas missile, the Islamic Jihad missile, which was fired from behind the cemetery. It's important to understand that our findings are a bit different, and we understand that only about 50 people were killed there.
Go to questions on the floor. Jane Norman from the ABC.
Ambassador, thank you for your address today. Jane Norman from the ABC. You're standing here in Canberra at the National Press Club, so I wanted to ask you an Australian sort of focused question. I'm wondering what the Israeli government has asked of Australia as this war continues. The opposition leader Peter Dutton has urged the Prime Minister to visit Israel. He's also put on the table the prospect, well, he has suggested the prospect of military support. Are either of these on the table as you see it? Have they been requested of the Australian government?
First and foremost, I would like to emphasize that we didn't have to ask anything from the Australian government, as they were very quick to respond. The clear messages of Prime Minister Albanese, Ms. Wong, the DPM, and the so many other political leaders were the messages of support that the State of Israel was looking for. Prime Minister Albanese was the first Australian politician to call me while I was still in Israel, and while I won't share the content of our telephone conversation, he was very supportive, as he was just a few hours ago in Washington. Israel did not ask anything from Australia.
It's fair to say if he wanted to go, a visit could be arranged. I know there's logistics over there at the moment.
Israel, as always, will be warmly welcoming an Australian high official.
Okay. Next question from Natassia Chrysanthus from SMH and The Age.
Thanks, Ambassador. A few hours ago, Foreign Minister Penny Wong joined some other international allies in calling for a humanitarian pause on hostilities in Gaza. Is this a call that you agree with, or one that Israel will be heeding? And what do you make of Australia's entry into that debate?
As I said before, Israel is in full compliance to the international law. Israel adheres to the international law. And for those of you who are not familiar with the law, it's important for me to emphasize that Israel, in accordance to the law, is not obliged to provide the humanitarian assistance, but to allow the passage of the humanitarian aid, as we are doing for the last few days. For those of you who are not following the news, so let me share with you that in recent days, or nearly 30 trucks were crossing the Rafah passage, full with medical supply, water, and food. It's also very important to once again understand the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The Hamas and some international reports are suggesting that there are no water in the Gaza Strip. So for you to know, Israel, until the October the 7th, is only responsible for the supply of up to 10%, and that's not the exact percentage, it's a bit lower. And the rest comes from 2 desalination plants that, in accordance to our information, are still operating. The 10% of water are coming from a pipe from Israel, and the water supply was resumed a week ago. As for the electricity, there are 10 different electricity lines, 9 of which were harmed by the malfunctioned missiles that were fired by the Hamas. And while the international community is so focused on the humanitarian condition in Gaza, let me please also bring up our concern about the humanitarian condition, situation of the 222 Israelis that were abducted, that were hijacked, among them elderly people, babies, toddlers, and others, What about their medical condition? What about their well-being? We're still waiting to see the international community putting the pressure on this issue exactly as they're putting the pressure on some other issues.
So just to clarify, Ambassador, so Penny Wong said the humanitarian aid going into Gaza was not enough. Do you disagree?
Can you repeat?
Penny Wong, in her statement this morning, said that there was not enough humanitarian aid going into Gaza. Do you disagree with that characterisation?
Well, with all due respect, the Minister of Foreign Affairs represents Australia. I represent Israel, and in accordance to our information and my knowledge, the humanitarian situation is fair. And once again, in recent days, we allowed the passing of about 30 trucks from the Rafah passage from Egypt to the Gaza Strip.
Thank you.
Next question from Daniel Hurst from The Guardian.
Daniel Hurst from Guardian Australia. Ambassador, you've spoken about some recent developments, but I want to take you to some statements that were made a few days after the inexcusable, horrific attacks by Hamas. The IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, said on the 10th of October that hundreds of tons of bombs had already been dropped on the Gaza Strip, adding that, quote, the emphasis is on damage and not on accuracy. And the same day, Defence Minister Gallant said, I ordered a complete siege of the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we act accordingly. Close quote. I just want to draw you out on how how are those statements consistent with international humanitarian law?
Well, I just share with you the current situation, and I think that the current situation is in line and full compliance with the international law.
And your discussion about accuracy of munitions, how is the quote, the emphasis is on damage and not on accuracy consistent?
Well, I attended yesterday a military briefing, and I received an updated information, so I'm sharing with you what I've received yesterday.
And to be clear, you're saying that Israel is fully compliant with international humanitarian law?
Absolutely.
Phil Curry from the Australian Financial Review.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, Ambassador. Could I ask you, in your capacity as both a former military man and with vast experience in government, the Israelis have always prided themselves on being able to keep their people safe. It's been a shibboleth of, since the foundation of the state. Clearly, those October 7 attacks represented a massive failure of intelligence and security, and I know you're dealing with the immediacy of those attacks at the moment, but do you believe there will need to be some sort of inquiry in the aftermath of all this as to how this happened and what those implications could be for the Prime Minister?
You're absolutely right. And as someone who knows the Israelis, rest assured that a commission of inquiry will be established. But this is not the time to answer all these right questions. And these are right questions. Questions that I ask myself. Questions that our people are asking themselves. This is the time to win the war. Once the war will be over, I can assure you that all these questions will be answered.
Thank you.
Chantal El-Khoury from ABC.
Chantal El-Khoury from the ABC. Ambassador, the Israeli president said it is an entire nation who are responsible. We will fight until we break their backs. We heard just now the Israeli army spokesperson also said we are dropping hundreds of bombs on Gaza. The focus is on damage, not on accuracy. You've said in your speech today that Israel does not want to kill the Palestinian people and poses no threat to them. Don't these comments contradict your statement and instead demonstrate the Israeli government's blatant disregard for Palestinian civilians?
Not at all. I think that first and foremost, it's also very important to understand that you don't measure neither the adherence of a nation nor the adherence of a nation to the international law by the toll of casualties on the other side. You measure it by its compliance to the law, by its determination to avoid, as Israel is doing, harming innocent Palestinians. I know it because I spent 12 years in the Israeli Defense Forces. Unfortunately, I was involved in military operations, And I can tell you first-handed, this is one of the most important values that we train our soldiers, the impurity of the arms. But you cannot deny, and I don't know what Australia will be doing, if Australia will be attacked by a barrage of missiles, and Australia will not respond because in the building from which these barrage of missiles were fired, there are also some civilians. And it's also very important to remember that since October the 7th, the Hamas fired over 7,500 missiles. And they fire all these missiles in order to kill people, innocent civilians. Just, we were lucky to have our missile defense Iron Dome system, which intercept the majority of the attacking missiles. But can you ask yourself what would have happened if we didn't have this missile defense? So we are blamed for better defending our people?
You're speaking about defence there, and we've heard that being said for the past 2 weeks, that notion that Israel has a right to defend itself. But what does that actually look like? Where is the line crossed? What number of Palestinian people killed is a satisfactory number for the for the Israeli government? And considering there are more than 5,000, including children, that have been killed, where is that line drawn?
As I said before, it's not about the numbers. You don't measure the legitimacy by the number, the toll of the other side fatalities and casualties. The second point that I would like to mention is that Israel is determined to continue in its actions and military actions to depose the Hamas regime and to destroy its military capabilities. We are not going to stop until all these objectives will be fully accomplished.
In terms of the response on not so much the weapons side, but you alluded to electricity supply. It's not Israel's responsibility, you say, to supply electricity to Gaza, and Israel hasn't occupied it since the early 2007s, but you ended up supplying electricity which was turned off. Is that, again, is that sort of within the remit of defending yourself, if that means ultimately hospitals run out of power?
Well, the hospitals do have powers, they have generators, and as I said before, 9 of the lines were hit by the Hamas. They were not hit by Israel. It's not our responsibility, and I was very clear about it.
Next question, Pablo Vinales from SBS.
Ambassador Pablo Vinales from SBS. Thank you so much for taking our questions. I just wanted to pick up on your previous answer. Penny Wong has also said today that the way Israel exercises its right to defend itself matters. You said in your speech it is Israel's intention to defeat Hamas. You call them a murder machine. Aren't you then also talking about defeating the Palestinian people, killing Palestinian people? Because how do you draw that distinction when you were saying that Hamas are using them as shields?
Not at all. As I said, and I think I was very clear, this war is not against the Palestinian people. Do you know that while we are talking, there are Palestinian children and Palestinian men and women that are treated in Israeli hospitals, not because they were wounded or injured during the last two and a half weeks. They are treated as part of a regular medical treatment that they receive in Israeli hospitals. Did you know that more than 20,000 Palestinian workers from the Gaza Strip work in Israel before October the 7th? So we have all the intention not to harm the innocent Palestinians. I do hope that once Hamas will be uprooted, it will be possible for the Israelis and the Palestinians to build human bridges, to live side by side in peace and security.
Do you see Israel as possibly having a role in, for want of a better word, replacing Hamas?
I think that it's premature to talk about the day after At the moment, we are all focused on as I mentioned before, accomplishing our military objectives, which are deposing the Hamas regime and destroying its military capabilities.
Tessa Conomu from AAP.
Thank you very much for your time today, Ambassador. Prime Minister Netanyahu's spokeswoman this morning said that Israel was taking into account foreign nationals who are in Gaza. Do you believe a humanitarian corridor should be opened before Israel deals with Hamas?
Well, this is not an issue for me to refer to, and I didn't hear Prime Minister Netanyahu's statement. But as I emphasized and did emphasize in my previous response and my opening remarks, we responded to the request from some other players, and as part of our international obligation, we allowed the passage of humanitarian assistance.
What about people who are trapped, Australians who are trapped in Gaza?
I can share with you that I'm engaged in person, in very close discussions with senior Australian officials, and Israel will do its utmost in order to make sure that all foreign nationals will be safe and will be able to evacuate the Gaza if they will wish to do so.
Is there a scheduled conversation between the Prime Minister Netanyahu and Albanese?
I believe that such a conversation will take place in the not too far future.
Okay. Lucy Gray from Channel 10 is next.
Hi, Ambassador. Lucy Gray from Channel 10. Today you said that Israel hasn't asked Australia for anything, but today the Australian government has announced additional ADF troops will be deployed to the Middle East. Do you see a scenario in future where the ADF personnel will be asked to assist the IDF on the ground?
I'm sure that you know that as diplomat, we should not answer theoretical questions. The decision was made by the Australian government, and I believe that you should address your question to the DPM, the acting Prime Minister.
And just another question. A local council in Sydney has voted to support Palestine and will raise the Palestinian flag outside its offices. What's your response to a local government in Australia taking a stance like this?
Well, I live in democracy, and Israel is a very vibrant democracy. Although I dislike to see local municipalities and others raising the other side flag, I can understand it. You'll be surprised to hear that I'm not the type of diplomat that believes that everyone should support Israel. This is normal, although I think that everybody should deplore, condemn the Hamas atrocities. And this is also the opportunity to remind all of us that the Hamas is a terror organization recognized also here in Australia.
Thank you.
The Hamas atrocities on October 7, I think, shocked the world, and at the time there was a wave of sympathy. What do you make of the time since? Because you've spoken about your aim to destroy your country's aim to destroy Hamas's military capability. Do you need to be wary as well of keeping the world on side?
Well, I think that for me, as an Israeli, it's hard to understand why the world find it a bit more challenging to stand behind Israel all the way. I don't recall when the Twin Towers were attacked that the United States was questioned about their military objectives, nor about the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan.
Kimberly Keynes from the West Australian.
Kimberly Keynes from the West Australian. Thank you, Ambassador, for your speech. In your speech, you say Israel is not attacking the Palestinian people, but last week we saw Labor ministers Ed Husic and Anne Ali accuse Israel of collective punishment against Palestinians. How do you respond to what they said, and are you confident that is Israel confident that Australia is united in standing with Israel?
First of all, I would like to say that I have lots of respect for Minister Ed. We met several times, and I respect him. Secondly, it's also very important not just to pick up one sentence out of his statement. In his statement, he was very clear, and correct me if I'm wrong, about condemning the Hamas attack, about recognizing Israel's right for self-defense, isn't he? So I think that he stands exactly where the entire government is standing, and as it was reflected in the motion that was tabled and adopted on October 16.
Just on another question, if I may. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is right now in the United States and has ruled out a visit to Israel on his way home. Are you disappointed that he isn't making the effort when we've seen US President and the British Prime Minister doing that?
As I said in my earlier remarks, I'm very thankful to the Australian government very clear stand. And it was stated more than once. We just heard the Prime Minister saying the same thing a few hours ago. And as mentioned before, Israel will warmly welcome a senior Australian official once he or she will be visiting Israel.
Thank you.
Next question from Finn McHugh from SBS.
Finn McHugh from SBS News. Ambassador, thanks for your time. Hamas's attack has been widely compared to Israel's 9/11, including by yourself just then. But in the immediate post-9/11 period, America launched two wars which didn't only see hundreds of thousands of innocent Afghans and Iraqis die who had nothing to do with 9/11, but are also widely regarded as a strategic mistake now, that they actually bolstered extremism in the region and created the conditions for ISIS to thrive. I'm wondering if, I know we're sitting here at a particular moment in history, tensions are running high, but I'm wondering if you fear that in another 20 years we'll be looking back on this moment and comparing not just the attacks, but the consequences of the responses to them.
I would be very disappointed if, in the end of this war, the reality on the ground would be similar to the reality prior to October the 7th. I do not wish that my children and grandchildren will experience in 20 years' time what we have just experienced in Israel 3 weeks ago. So I think that the Israeli government decision to depose the Hamas regime and to destroy its military capabilities is the right decision.
Just to follow up, so your stated aim is to destroy Hamas. You've been very explicit about that it's not the Palestinian people. In a hypothetical situation where you have managed to eradicate Hamas, if that is possible through force, can you guarantee that every Palestinian who has been forced to flee in this period will be able to return to Gaza after the war?
Absolutely. And by the way, while talking about the Palestinians that were advised that it would be better for them to temporarily, and the emphasis is on the temporary, to evacuate, I would like to also mention the over 120,000 Israelis that are temporarily displaced from their homes. People that lived in Kibbutz Be'eri and Re'im, along all the villages and the towns surrounding the Gaza Strip, were evacuated. They're living now in different places. Some because their houses were destroyed by the Hamas terrorists, burned, destroyed, and some because security concern. The same also applies to many Israelis that are living along the northern border.
In terms of the response, and obviously the whole world's reacted in horror to October 7 and would understand any government wanting to make sure that can't happen to their people again. But in terms of it being of benefit, not just in the short term of stopping the attacks happening, but in the longer term, is there any worry that through what could be a pretty brutal campaign, you might harden the hearts of another generation of Palestinians?
I can't answer your question, but as I mentioned before, our intention is not to burn our bridges with the Palestinians. Again, while we're talking, there is still an ongoing cooperation between the Palestinian Authority and some Israeli officials and institutions. It's very important to know it, to remember it. And I do hope that once, and by the way, as I mentioned in my speech, the Palestinian people are suffering. The Palestinian people are suffering under the Hamas, the terror organization, and the Islamic Jihad. They're exploited. They are killed. So I believe that it will be also in the benefit of the Palestinians once the Hamas will be uprooted and they will be able to live as free people in the Gaza Strip. And maybe then it will be possible. I know that that's our intention, also to build human bridges and to improve the standard of living. We can do it.
Next question from Misha Schubert.
Ambassador Misha Schubert, as a director of the National Press Club, you had spoken earlier in your Q&A about an aspiration to see a time in which people in the region live in peace and security. So my question to you is, what is the path, in your view, to get to that future that you've articulated? And at this juncture, how optimistic are you about the progress of that towards that path?
Well, I'm old enough to remember times that we didn't have any relationship with the Palestinian Authority. At that time, it was the PLO. And in 1994 and 1993, we signed the Declaration of Principle with the Palestinians. And that's, as far as I understand, still the major framework for the way forward. I do believe that once all these extreme elements will be taken, will be uprooted, it will be possible to talk to the moderate Palestinian leader about the way forward.
Thank you. And how optimistic are you at this juncture about that?
I'm optimistic by nature. Mm-hmm. I'm optimistic by nature because I simply don't think that we have any other alternative.
Next question comes from Steve Lewis.
Steve Lewis, a director of the National Press Club, Ambassador. The world's at an inflection point, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and now the war in the Middle East. I want to tease you out, if I may, on the role of the United States and China, two superpowers that, as we speak, are both competing for support in the developed and developing world. The United States, of course, has sent 2 aircraft carrier groups to the Mediterranean to position itself in support of Israel and against a further escalation involving Hezbollah and other supporters of Hamas. China has taken a very different route and has sought to play the role of a peacemaker, but of course at the same time it is building relationships with Russia in particular. We saw Xi Jinping and Putin meet just a week or so ago. What's your view on the role of China at the moment in terms of the Middle East conflict, the war between Israel and Hamas? Are you disappointed that Beijing has not sought to be more overt in its criticism of Hamas? Because its rhetoric has been quite different to the United States. And do you think China and Russia are looking to use your conflict with Hamas to build broader support? Are you concerned about Russia, China perhaps using this to build proxy support?
Absolutely. And that's the long answer. And you ask me if I'm disappointed? Yeah, I am disappointed. I am disappointed not just about the Russian or the Chinese. I'm disappointed that there are more countries that were not as clear as Australia when it comes to condemning the Hamas, recognizing the atrocities that were committed. Yes, I am upset. I'm also upset that since October the 7th, the focus at the moment is on the other side. People are trying to suggest that there is some sort of moral equivalence. There is no moral equivalence. We are not the victims. Sorry, we are the victims. We are not the aggressor. Sorry. We are the victims. It's important to understand it. We were attacked. Our people were slaughtered. We didn't ask for this war. And probably, if we were still living in peace, I wasn't standing here as the official representative of the State of Israel. We did not ask nor seek for this war. We are the victims, and it's important to remember it. While expressing your concerns about the humanitarian situation, about the Palestinian innocent civilians' casualties, it's important to remember that we are the victims.
Do you think China, in its failure to make those overt criticisms of Hamas in particular, is giving de facto support to Iran and helping Iran build allies in the Middle East to escalate the conflict with Israel?
Well, the Iranians, I spoke a lot about Iran. Iran is not just about their quest to acquire nuclear weapon capabilities. It's about their never-ending efforts to undermine the moderate Arab states. Iran is using its proxies, the Houthis and the Houthis in Yemen, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Hamas, in order to destabilize our region. As I mentioned, they are the one to equip, to train, and to fund all this organization. And of course, whenever the attention, the focus is not on Iran, I believe that they feel more comfortable to take their measures to the extreme.
There was a decision made, you mentioned there, you're the victims, you're not the aggressor. There was a decision made not to release a lot of the vision from the October 7 attacks because it was too horrific. Is that something that the government's weighing up? If you feel as though there's been a sort of lost focus on how bad these attacks were, that perhaps something needs to be released that does sort of show the reality of it?
The decision not to release the graphic images was first and foremost out of respect to the victims, out of respect to the families. But once we realized that there are some doubts about what official Israel is saying, about the atrocities that were committed, we were simply left without any other choice. And with the consent of the families, we released these horrible images. Believe you me, I saw them. Horrific.
A lot were just shown, though, were they not, to journalists rather than widely dispersed?
Well, for us, it was very important that the ones that are responsible for reporting and writing about it, that they will be the one to see these horrific graphic images, and that's why a special briefing was held in Israel just the day before yesterday.
Okay. Jane Norman, next.
Ambassador, before the Hamas attack and subsequent war, Israel was inching towards a deal effectively to normalise relations with Saudi Arabia. I'm just wondering where you see that now, if this has pushed that further into the future, if you're optimistic that, given what's happened here, that Israel can still achieve that deal with Saudi Arabia.
It's hard for me to believe that it will happen next week. I will be very happy if it will. And I can assure you that we will continue our efforts with the United States of America and other allies in order to reach the point that our relationship will be normalized.
Daniel Hurst from The Guardian.
Ambassador, Daniel Hurst from The Guardian again. It sort of follows up Misha's question from earlier about the pathway to peace. Separating out the events, the terrorist attack of the 7th, how do you see hope to be given to the people of Israel and the Palestinian people to be able to live in security behind secure borders? And as part of that, I'd like you to ask you to reflect on Prime Minister Netanyahu at the UN in September held up a map of the new Middle East, and it just showed Israel without any of the Palestinian territories. I guess my question is about how is hope given to both sides for secure territory to be allocated in future?
As I said, mentioned before, I'm young enough to remember the 60s and the 70s. And I remember times that we were very, very close. The Palestinians and the Israelis. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were working in Israel, in constructions, in the tourism, and in many other sectors. We were really very close. I believe that the past experience proved that there is a possibility that in the end of this war, or in the not too far future, the two parties will find a way to bridge the gap. Once again, it's not going to take place in a week time. It's a very long process, a process in which we need to build bridges, human bridges. We need to talk about the role of education. We need to talk about children. We need to talk about women. And yes, I'm still very optimist that it's durable. Because, as I said before, I don't think that we have any other alternative. I think that the Abraham Accords and the normalization of relationship between Israel and moderate Arab states can help. Because there is a lot that the Arab world can benefit from relationship with Israel. You know that with the United Arab Emirates, since we signed the peace accord, the trade has tripled itself. And I'm talking about trade in nearly every possible sector. So I'm optimistic. And it's not just related to my nature, but it is also related to my understanding the reality in the Middle East.
Those accords are with other countries. What about a two-state solution? Is that the future?
I didn't hear any Israeli official saying that they are not adhering to the two-state solution. I think that it's important to understand that an agreement cannot be imposed on the parties involved. In the end of the day, it is for the two parties to sit around the negotiating table and to reach an agreement. And they can reach a different agreement. Not that I'm trying to suggest it, but they can reach a different agreement. So I believe that the international community should support every outcome that will be reached by these two parties that are involved.
Thank you.
Does that allude to a two-state solution just seeming so far out of reach right now that perhaps steps along the way is more achievable?
I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
When you say any agreement should be respected, not just the one that's forced upon them, a lot of the world talks about a two-state solution, but are you alluding to that just seeming so hard to achieve right now that perhaps there needs to be a shorter-term focus after?
Again, this is not for me to decide. This is for the two parties to sit down, and if they will decide that the best outcome should be a temporary agreement until another agreement will be reached, that will be for the two parties.
Okay. Phil Curry from the Australian Financial Review.
Thanks again, Ambassador. You spoke about wanting to destroy Hamas militarily. Would the same, and I'm probably asking this on behalf, there's a lot of Australian citizens, many thousands in Lebanon. If Hezbollah were to join the war, as they've been threatening to do, would Israel go into Lebanon like they did in 2006 and 1982, and similarly try and disarm or destroy Hezbollah militarily as well? Especially they're a much more formidable force than Hamas. But do you see that eventuating should Hezbollah jump the fence, so to speak?
Well, since October the 7th, the Hezbollah is engaged in daily provocations along the northern border, during which they fire missiles, anti-tanks missile. Some terrorists were infiltrating some of the villages along the border. We had a number of casualties on our side. And as I mentioned before, we do not have any desire or interest to open another front. But if we will be forced to, Israel is ready. We will not be surprised again.
And would that involve, say, just fighting in the south or going all the way to Beirut?
Well, you probably understand that I cannot refer to military plans, military maneuvers, but we have the means to respond to the threat that the Hamas, the Hezbollah, is posing to Israel.
Maurice Riley, our own, to wrap things up.
Right on time. Thank you for taking so many questions, Ambassador, and thank you for coming here today. The role of Qatar, you've got 222 hostages still captive. How do you characterise the role of the Qatar, I think it's the government or whoever it is, do you see them as honest brokers?
I'm sorry I can't answer your question, as I really don't know. What I know is that there are quite a number of players that are trying their utmost in order to bring about the release of the 222 children, babies, elderly that were abducted. I also understand that the Hamas is exploiting the Israeli hostages in order to impose some measures that Israel may not be interested in. So this is a very delicate situation, very complicated situation. But as I mentioned before, we are determined to continue.
Ambassador, it's a very difficult time for your nation. We very much appreciate your time here at the National Press Club.